Latino or African, wherever they are, at a Home Depot, at a court hearing.
The sirens cut through the cold morning air like a warning from another era. Overhead, a drone hovered silent, precise, predatory. Then came the command, move in seconds. Dozens of ICE agents in tactical gear stormed the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Edison, New Jersey. Workers froze mid-shift scanners dropping from their hands as the warehouse transformed into a battlefield of flashing lights, barking dogs, and panic. By the time the sun rose over the glass roof, 20 people were already in custody. What began as a normal workday had turned into the largest federal immigration raid on U.S. soil since 2019. But this time, it wasn't a local operation. It was a message. We are throwing them the hell out of our country. President Donald Trump declared hours later on the South Lawn, his words echoing across a deeply divided nation. According to Reuters and the BBC, the raid was part of a multi-agency crackdown coordinated between ICE, Homeland Security investigations, and federal prosecutors aimed at dismantling what officials describe as a shadow workforce economy sustained by fake documents and corporate negligence. Strategically, the operation signaled a turning point. Unlike previous enforcement waves that targeted small food plants or construction crews, this strike hit a Fortune 500 company, a symbol of global commerce and American productivity. Defense news analysts noted that the use of drones and K-9 units represented a tactical escalation, echoing the precision raids used in counterterrorism operations abroad. Jane's Defense Weekly described the move as a fusion of intelligence and enforcement mirroring U.S. hybrid warfare models, rapid coordinated multi-domain. But there was more behind the shock. This wasn't only about undocumented labor, it was about testing federal reach, a warning to corporations and perhaps to entire industries. In an election year where immigration defines political identity, Trump's administration has positioned the raids as proof of his campaign promise, restoring sovereignty and security. Globally, the images from Edison mirrored operations thousands of miles away. In eastern Ukraine, drones hunt insurgents through factory ruins. In Israel, counterintelligence teams use similar AI-driven surveillance to track infiltrations. And in China, reports from Al Jazeera describe nationwide sweeps against foreign workers amid tightening security laws. Each case reflects a universal tension: how far can a state go to protect itself before crossing into fear and control? Inside the Amazon facility, that question felt painfully real. Workers screamed, some fled, others dropped to their knees, surrounded by federal agents shouting orders in English and Spanish. Witnesses later told The Guardian that family members rushed to the warehouse gates, waving documents and crying out names. They were terrified, one investigator told DW. No one knew who was legal and who wasn't, only that everyone was guilty by association. The fallout was immediate. By nightfall, footage from Edison dominated global headlines. Wall Street paused to ask whether corporate America had become complicit in border crimes. Human rights groups warned of mass detentions and civil rights violations. Yet for millions of Americans watching from their living rooms, the message was different. Washington was taking control again. But as federal power expands into the workplace, a haunting question looms in a nation built on freedom: how much security is too much? The morning after Edison, it became clear this wasn't an isolated raid. Across the map, from the Bronx to Dallas, the same choreography unfolded: unmarked vans, tactical vests, and terrified workers pressed against walls. What began in one Amazon warehouse had morphed into a nationwide campaign. ICE leadership, according to NBC and Reuters, had issued a directive: 1-200 to 1-500 arrests per day. Agents, one source told the BBC, called it a quota war. The goal: dismantle illegal employment networks feeding America's supply chains. By dawn, federal teams hit multiple targets. In Washington Heights, a bakery. In Lenexa, Kansas, a family-owned restaurant. In North Texas, a manufacturing plant where 160 workers were handcuffed, processed, and flown to detention centers. Each site revealed the same pattern: forged social security cards, duplicate green cards, and foreign passports that passed corporate verification systems. Officials framed it as the largest mobilization of immigration enforcement since Operation Northern Star. But this time, something was different: the technology. Drones tracked fleeing suspects through alleyways. Mobile scanners processed IDs in seconds. Data from Homeland Security's SentinelNet platform cross-referenced faces with federal databases in real time. The result: efficiency at a scale unseen before. DW reported that similar methods are being tested in Europe to combat illegal labor linked to human trafficking. Defense news analysts noted that U.S. agencies are now applying battlefield surveillance tactics once reserved for counterinsurgency to domestic enforcement. It's the militarization of the workplace, wrote Jane's Defense Weekly, and it's happening under the banner of legality. But beneath the precision, the operation revealed a darker reality, the scale of dependency. In city after city, as raids swept through construction sites, food markets, and logistics hubs, local economies shuttered. Restaurants closed overnight. Deliveries stalled, and factories faced labor shortages not seen since the pandemic. The Guardian highlighted that over 1,200 businesses were under active investigation, including subcontractors for major corporations, some tied to defense manufacturing and infrastructure development. This was no longer just immigration enforcement, it was economic warfare on a shadow system that had quietly sustained industries for decades. Analysts compared it to U.S. sanctions abroad, a sudden strike designed to cripple illicit networks, but with collateral impact. Globally, the parallels were striking. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine's intelligence units have been dismantling smuggling rings that launder wartime labor through neighboring states. In Iran, crackdowns on migrant labor have intensified after Israel's air campaigns disrupted trade corridors. And in China, labor camps and domestic raids are expanding under Beijing's new internal purity policy. Each reflects a world turning inward, where nations see illegal movement not as poverty, but as potential threat. Back in the US, that same logic now drives the raids. This is about national integrity, said a senior Homeland Security official to Reuters. If a company as large as Amazon is compromised, then the system itself is at risk. Yet for many, watching integrity comes at a cost. Families separated, businesses collapsing. A young worker in Edison told Al Jazeera, "We came for work, not war." But for Washington, the battlefield has already been chosen, and it stretches from border crossings to break rooms. The question that now haunts every employer: if federal agents walked in tomorrow, how many of their workers would vanish before lunch? In the aftermath of the raids, a more disturbing picture began to emerge, one that reached far beyond the warehouses and kitchens of America. Investigators uncovered a sprawling criminal economy built on fake identities, forged documents, and stolen data, stretching from Caracas to Chicago. ICE officials described it as a shadow infrastructure, a black market industry capable of mimicking the legitimacy of government records. According to Reuters and The Guardian, federal agents seized boxes of counterfeit IDs, driver's licenses, green cards, and social security numbers that could pass even Amazon's advanced hiring software. The BBC reported that some of the most convincing fakes were crafted using stolen biometric data from global cyber breaches. Names and faces lifted from real citizens were embedded into new documents, creating what experts call identity clones. These weren't crude forgeries, they were replicas indistinguishable from authentic records. Forensic analysts told DW that the sophistication rivaled intelligence-level forgery units. The operation's funding sources traced back to organized crime groups across Latin America, including the Venezuelan syndicate Tren de Aragua and Mexican cartels, now branching into digital fraud. The U.S. Justice Department confirmed that profits from narcotics online scams and retail theft rings were being funneled into fake ID production. The goal: infiltrate America's workforce, exploit its systems, and launder money through legitimate payroll channels. Defense news drew an alarming parallel. This is the same hybrid warfare concept that Russia has weaponized, using non-military tools to destabilize societies from within. The manipulation of identity, one analyst warned, is a 21st century invasion without tanks. The discovery of these ID factories revealed not only a labor problem, but a breach of national security. Even more troubling were reports from Al Jazeera and The Guardian linking human trafficking to these forged networks. In major sanctuary cities, shelters housing asylum seekers had become recruiting grounds. Traffickers offered employment assistance, issuing fake IDs in exchange for labor, then seizing the workers' paychecks to maintain control. The victims, many from Venezuela, Honduras, and West Africa, lived in overcrowded apartments, their wages siphoned off by intermediaries. Some were forced to work in logistics centers tied to major corporations. In effect, the U.S. supply chain had been quietly infiltrated by an underground labor empire. The question wasn't just how it happened, but how long Washington had looked the other way. Globally, similar schemes have surfaced. In Israel, Defense News noted migrant laborers exploited by private contractors have been discovered in restricted military zones. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine's intelligence agencies uncovered black market passports used by mercenaries posing as civilian workers. And in China, DW reports that millions of internal migrants are being tracked by state-run surveillance systems to prevent unregistered employment, a digital mirror image of America's crisis. Each example reveals a world where identity itself has become a weapon traded, sold, and stolen. Back in the US, ICE's data analytics teams are now deploying machine learning models to cross-check employment databases with global cybercrime records. But with every raid, new layers of fraud emerge deeper, smarter, and harder to trace. A former DHS cybersecurity chief told BBC News, "You can't just arrest your way out of this. It's systemic, it's economic, it's geopolitical." For the millions of Americans watching, the question grows louder: if fake identities can infiltrate the country's biggest companies, what else or who else has already slipped through the cracks? The raids sent shockwaves through America's cities, not just in warehouses or kitchens, but in the streets. By nightfall, crowds gathered outside Amazon's New York bookstore and ICE field offices, waving banners that read "Families Not Felons." Protesters clashed with police as chants echoed through Manhattan: "No more cages, no more fear." Across sanctuary cities New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, the tension reached boiling point. DW described it as the largest public backlash to domestic immigration enforcement in over a decade. Within 48 hours, 44 people were arrested during protests in Midtown alone. For some, the raids represented order restored. For others, they symbolized a state turning against its own labor force. At the heart of it were families, husbands, wives, children waiting outside detention centers, clutching birth certificates and work permits. A Venezuelan woman told Al Jazeera her husband had been detained at a construction site in Texas. "He has no record," she cried. "He was building homes for Americans." Her words captured the emotional cost of enforcement, the human collateral buried beneath the statistics. Economically, the tremors spread fast. According to Reuters, restaurant chains across the Midwest reported staff shortages within days. Construction timelines stalled. Delivery routes collapsed. Employers who had relied on undocumented labor suddenly faced shutdowns or million-dollar fines. Analysts at The Guardian called it a domino effect of dependence. The system was purging itself, but not without pain. From Washington's perspective, this was necessary disruption. Homeland Security officials insisted that the crackdown would restore integrity to the American workplace. Yet critics saw something darker, a campaign that blurred the line between enforcement and intimidation. DW reported allegations that agents handcuffed citizens by mistake. One man in Sacramento, a naturalized American, was detained after slashing an ice tire in panic. His wife screamed as drones hovered overhead. The optics men in chains, drones circling corporate rooftops carried political weight. Trump's administration called it law and order in action. Opponents called it theater, a show of force meant to stoke fear ahead of an election year. Globally, parallels surfaced again. In Iran, after coordinated strikes with Israel, internal crackdowns on refugee workers intensified under security pretexts. In Ukraine, wartime labor sweeps are reshaping entire regions, pushing displaced civilians into underground economies. In China, a BBC investigation found authorities detaining factory migrants in surveillance-driven cleansing campaigns. Across continents, the same justification repeats: national safety first, individual freedom second. Back in the US, the clash was no longer just about immigration. It was about identity. What kind of nation emerges when fear becomes policy? Protesters in Los Angeles carried signs quoting the Constitution: "We the people" includes everyone. Yet federal officials, echoing Trump's tone, countered with a different creed: sovereignty before sympathy. The raids have already redefined the American workplace. In Edison, production slowed for days. In Kansas, small businesses shuttered entirely. The economic ripples experts told Reuters could rival the pandemic's early labor crisis. Still, for millions watching, the images felt oddly satisfying proof that Washington was finally enforcing laws long ignored. As the protests grow louder and the handcuffs tighter, one question now divides the country: is this the price of safety or the beginning of something far more permanent? In Washington, the message was unmistakable. President Donald Trump's America was back on offense. Standing before the press, he declared, "We are protecting our nation, our workers, and our sovereignty. No apologies." Behind him, ICE Director Sarah Lopez outlined what she called a new phase in national enforcement, a doctrine built on deterrence technology and fear. Reuters reported that Trump had personally authorized the expansion of the raids under the 2025 Homeland Enforcement Directive, a sweeping policy granting ICE and Homeland Security investigations broader powers to target both undocumented workers and their employers. No one the president warned is above the law, not the criminal, not the CEO. The administration's supporters see this as a long overdue correction. Fox affiliates across the Midwest ran footage of workers led away in chains with captions reading "Justice for American Jobs." Polls by The Guardian and BBC News revealed a deep divide. 56% of Americans approve of stricter enforcement, while 41% fear the erosion of civil rights. The remaining few are caught in the middle, torn between security and compassion. In Congress, the debate turned fiery. Republican lawmakers framed the raids as proof that Trump had restored federal backbone. Democrats countered with accusations of state terror. The result, political paralysis in a country already strained by cultural fault lines. Analysts from Defense News drew a striking analogy. The U.S. is now treating immigration like hybrid warfare. These operations blend intelligence, surveillance, and public messaging, one expert wrote. They're designed not just to remove offenders, but to control the narrative, to show that Washington commands every inch of American soil. But that control has a cost. Sanctuary cities are turning into flashpoints of resistance. Mayors from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles openly defied federal orders, calling them acts of intimidation. Federal aid to those cities has since been suspended, intensifying the standoff between Washington and local authorities. Meanwhile, global reactions are mixed. The European Union expressed concern over disproportionate enforcement, while Israeli defense officials privately noted similarities to their counter-infiltration programs. In China, state media mocked Washington's human rights hypocrisy, pointing to America's use of drones against its own workforce. And in Moscow, Russian analysts cited the raids as evidence that U.S. domestic control mirrors the tactics it once condemned abroad. For Trump, however, this is precisely the point. We're enforcing the law he told a rally in Dallas. The world can watch, but we will not be lectured. His message resonates with voters who see national identity as a sacred boundary. Under his leadership, border policy has expanded into the interior, the factory, the warehouse, the farm. DW described it as the creation of an internal border state invisible yet everywhere. Surveillance technologies originally deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan now monitor America's cities. AI-powered recognition systems, license plate readers, and drones track not terrorists but laborers. To Trump's base, this is efficiency. To his critics, it's authoritarianism in real time. The Guardian summarized the paradox best. The United States is winning the battle for control and losing the war for trust. Yet for all the outrage and applause, one truth remains undeniable. Washington's grip is tightening, and as enforcement expands, a question echoes through both the halls of power and the streets below. When every citizen becomes a suspect, who's left to feel free? By the end of spring 2025, the raids had reshaped the very anatomy of American labor. Factories in Texas sat half empty. Restaurants across the Midwest cut hours or closed entirely. Warehouses from New Jersey to California scrambled to fill vacancies left by detained workers. But this wasn't just about job loss, it was about power accountability and the new frontier of federal control. Reuters confirmed that ICE and the Department of Labor jointly launched over 200 investigations into companies suspected of hiring undocumented workers. The fines were staggering, some exceeding $950,000 per violation. Even giants like Amazon, under mounting public pressure, began conducting internal audits to prove compliance. For the first time in modern history, corporate America wasn't just a bystander to immigration policy, it was a target. Jane's Defense Weekly called it economic enforcement warfare, a coordinated strategy to punish negligence and deter future collusion. The raids had evolved into something larger than policing a demonstration of state supremacy. Washington was broadcasting to every boardroom, and back alley national security now includes the payroll. But beneath the rhetoric of justice, the reality was far more complicated. The Guardian reported that thousands of legal residents, including naturalized citizens, were caught in the dragnet, detained for hours before verification. DW quoted civil rights lawyers calling the operation a humanitarian minefield. Employers once complicit now turned paranoid. HR departments froze hiring, small businesses collapsed, and entire industries slowed under the weight of compliance bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Trump's administration celebrated record deportations and job openings for real Americans. His rallies thundered with chants of "America works for Americans." Supporters saw order restored, a nation reclaiming its identity. Critics saw an erosion of trust between citizen and state, a creeping fear that no one, regardless of status, was safe from error. Globally, this new American model reverberated. In Europe, governments quietly studied Washington's integration of surveillance drones and AI into labor oversight. In Israel, Defense News reported a similar blending of military intelligence into domestic policing. In China, the state praised the US shift toward total accountability, even as Western observers called it ironic. Across continents, lines blurred between defense policing and governance, a sign of the 21st century's defining paradox freedom secured through control. Economists warned that America's crackdown could spark a labor vacuum. According to Al Jazeera, more than 3 million low-wage positions remain unfilled, threatening inflation in construction, logistics, and food service sectors. Yet politically, the effect was undeniable. Trump's approval ratings on national security surged above 60%, the highest since his re-election. His message, law, order, and jobs for citizens first had taken root. But deeper questions lingered beneath the applause. How sustainable is an economy that punishes the very labor it relies upon? Can surveillance and sovereignty coexist without eroding liberty? In the final analysis, the images remain indelible: drones circling an Amazon facility, workers kneeling on concrete agents moving with mechanical precision. The symbol of American innovation, a fulfillment center had become the stage for a new era of enforcement. The global stage is watching closely because what happened in Edison may not stay there. It may define how every modern democracy balances its borders, its workforce, and its soul. When the state becomes the ultimate employer and enforcer, one question remains: who in the end is truly free? The 2025 ICE raids marked a turning point in America's balance between freedom and security. Under President Trump, workplace enforcement evolved into a nationwide show of power: drones, K-9 units, and AI surveillance transforming routine operations into militarized precision strikes. What began as an immigration crackdown soon exposed an industrial-scale network of fraud, trafficking, and corporate complicity. Supporters hailed it as a restoration of sovereignty. Opponents called it state overreach. The economic shock was immediate: disrupted supply chains, soaring fines, and deep fear in immigrant communities. Yet politically, the strategy succeeded. America appeared disciplined, its leadership decisive, its borders fortified. Globally, Washington's model is being studied and replicated, a sign that immigration, labor, and security have merged into one geopolitical battlefield. But the moral question persists: can liberty survive inside a system built to monitor and control? For now, the answer remains suspended somewhere between the roar of the drones and the silence left behind.